Didier, welcome to Defying Gravity, and just fantastic to have a chat with you today. Founder of Cultureamp. Can you tell us, just for the uninitiated, if there are any left, what Cultureamp is and does?
Sure. So our mission at Cultureamp is to create a better world of work. And we think that's important for two different reasons. One, because for organizations, people and culture is increasingly the biggest lever you have to be successful. And so organizations care about the quality and what it means to be able to build a culture at scale. And then also for individuals, for better or for worse, work is increasingly how we create identity in our lives. And so Cultureamp is an employee experience platform. And what we do is we help organizations create intentional culture at scale. So we've been doing that for almost 10 years now, a bit over 10 years now. We work with about 7,000 customers around the world, every size, every industry, and we help them understand their employee experience and do something about it.
Amazing. And that sounds like pretty satisfying work. What do you love the most about what you do?
I mean, one of the core concepts is that there's a lot of really good thought already out there. So there's decades worth of research in the space, but for a lot of people, it's not accessible. It's, how do I actually use that to make my organization better? And so a lot of the joy comes from that. It's sort of connecting all of this thought and insight into getting it into the hands of people actually doing something with it. And so when you get to speak to a customer and they tell you about how they've changed the experience for their employees and how it's improved the culture that they have and how that's led to a better business, that's what gets us up in the morning.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what sort of scale are you at now, Didier? How many employees?
I mentioned earlier, we're about 7,000 customers around the world, just under 1,000 employees across Australia, US, Europe, and a few other places. So we have hubs in Melbourne, Sydney, Chicago, San Francisco, New York, London, and Berlin.
Yeah.
And revenue-wise, up into the well past 100 million in revenue, and sort of thinking about how we get our way to $1 billion.
Yeah, amazing. So what a journey you've had. How long has it been going? Founded as, am I right, 2009 or?
So I left my previous, I used to be the CEO of a film visual effects company, Rising Sun Pictures. I left that in 2009 to start Cultureamp.
Yep.
Spent a couple of years kicking around trying to work out what I wanted to do, moved to Melbourne, met my co-founders, Rod, Doug, and John. And so Cultureamp, as we know it today, really came to be about 2011.
2011, awesome. Now, we shared a co-working space 100 years ago. It was, maybe you had 10 people there and it was growing fast and you soon left to get your own digs. But, from that scale to 1,000 employees, you've been CEO throughout. Can you just talk to us about how you did that journey? You have grown so much in that time. Your film company was how many people? Was your
250.
250. So you'd certainly run a medium-sized business, but this has been an incredible trajectory in those just over 12 years. What's your secret? We all want to know.
I don't think there's a secret. One foot in front of the other. I think that's, the truth of it is always, and you would know this too, having worked in all sorts of different size businesses. I remember the early days of Cultureamp, I would go see our customers at the time, like your Airbnbs and Boxes and Squares and all those sorts of companies. And back then they were like a couple hundred people. And I'd walk into their offices and you'd look around and you're like, wow, wouldn't it be amazing to be at this scale? You'd really have everything together. And then, of course, you get to 200 people and you feel like you're, put together with string and sticky tape. And then you keep growing, you get to 500 and you get to 1,000. And at every scale, you just think, we're only just holding it together. Like, it'll be so good when we actually get to a sort of mature state. And of course, you never get there. You're always trying to be better.
Yeah. But when you look back, you must be doing things differently at 1,000 to 200 to 10.
Yeah, I mean, of course. And it's interesting because I think as people join the company, they'll often look at things and go, this way that we're doing things may have worked when we were smaller, but it's not going to work now. And my reflection is that actually when someone says that, it's actually rarely something that we've held on to. In fact, often what it is that as you grow, you actually change from what you were to. And people come in and they look at these things and go, this could be better. And it wasn't like we were different when we were smaller too. And in some ways, as you get bigger, it gets harder to keep some of the things you used to do. I think the most interesting part of continuing to grow is you get to bring in all these different people with all these different skills and experiences. And Sal, who's my COO, she has this great comment. It's like, what is it time for now? And so there's always this balance between not just wanting to change things for change's sake, but also going, what will serve us in this next phase? And I think the hardest thing as you get bigger, and this is also a Salism, is when you're smaller, you do everything yourself, and it's almost a mark of pride. As you get bigger, you want to remove the cognitive load of doing BAU, because you need to be able to keep your mind, you keep all your ingenuity for the new big problems you're going to face. And that's probably the hardest thing, is that there's stuff where you have to go like, this just can't be a sprint anymore. This can't be a mad scramble. We've just got to get it, systems and processes and all those things, so that this stuff just gets done. And it's not consuming our time and energy, because we need to keep our time and energy for the new problems, and guarantee you every time you double, you've got a whole bunch of new problems.
Yeah, really interesting. And how did you do that? Was that the hiring of Sal?
Yes, you hire one person. She's a big part of it. I think across the board, you always want to have a mix of pushing yourself to bring in, the thing is, as you get bigger as a company, you get access to people that you didn't have access to before, either because you're now able to pay higher salaries because you're a bigger business, or because you're less risky for somebody to come across. They look at you and go, okay, you're not going to fall over. You're a decent sized business. So you now have access to people that may have not come and joined a 10-person startup. And so you're constantly looking for who are those people that can come in and bring the experience and the skill and the insight you don't have, but equally aren't going to try and make you be the company they came from. Otherwise, why are they coming to work for you?
Yes.
And so a lot of it is about finding those people that can come in. And then also internally, with the people you have got, it's just never stop learning. So, every year I go to my board and I say, what do I need to do to be the CEO that Cultureamp needs next year? Because that CEO is a different CEO than what we needed last year. And I think you need to do that in every role inside the organization, because the truth is that the company, as long as you've got product market fit and you're reasonably successful, the company will probably grow faster than most people's natural ability to keep up.
Yeah. And so you have that conversation with the board and get input from them?
Yeah, they don't always have a good answer for it, but I make a point of asking the question every year.
Okay. And we talk a lot about the changes and bringing in those new skills and so on, but what's been the most important thing to hold on to? Because obviously you're a culture, you help companies with their culture, and you're also a famous culture yourself. You win plenty of best employers yourself. What's been the most important thing to hold on to as you grow and change?
I think believing in people's potential, and once again, you're constantly bringing people in who are very skillful, very talented, and have networks of great people. And part of what you want them to do is to bring in new people that you didn't have access to before. But it can also sometimes be, you can fall into the trap, particularly when you're growing very quickly, of leaders and managers looking at the people that you have going, none of these are exactly what I want. I need something different. I'm going to go hire this person that I need right now. And I think we can fall into the trap of overfitting people for what we think is the need right now, and not enough thinking, how is this person, whether it's somebody we already have or somebody we're about to hire, going to be a great person for Cultureamp? Multiple steps. So I saw something I say at Cultureamp quite a few times is if you don't do 2 jumps at Cultureamp, so that might not be a promotion, it could be a lateral move or, just exposure to something you've never done before, but 2 decent jumps, we've wasted your potential.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean that always happens. It won't always happen, but that's got to be our mental model, that we've got to find people and go, how can we help you jump several times? Because then the company's growing from within. If we're only growing by bringing in people from outside, then you lose part of it. Because if all it took was being able to hire great people, then how does a startup ever win? Because you can never compete on money and all these other things. So these other companies are able to access all that talent. Sometimes it requires taking risks, giving people a shot, helping people grow. And so that's the thing that I think is really important not to lose.
Yeah. And what do you do? I mean, that's a fantastic development goal, 2 big leaps for each person. Have you got any secret sauce to share on how you support them to do that? Because that's
yeah, I mean, there's a couple of parts. Like one part of it goes to the heart of our own platform and how we use our own platform. So when we think about how do you have good development conversations and how do you equip leaders and managers to have good development conversations? Yeah. And so at some level, part of our secret sauce, if you will, is what are the conversations that you want to drive across your organization at scale? One-on-ones, performance reviews, but also things like development conversations. So, our platform provides templates and all those things to help managers sit down and go, what do you want at this stage? Given what you want, how might we set good goals for where you want to go next? So there's that part. So we use our own platform and that's an evolution in terms of how we do that internally. But then I think the hardest piece, particularly for like a founder or a senior executive, is to keep that conversation alive with your own leaders, because there is always a natural tension where you're putting a lot of pressure on your leaders to achieve results. And you'll often hear people going, I don't have the talent that I need. And so the question is, well, who in your group can you place a bet on? Who can we, support? Who can we lean on? Yes, let's bring in talent from outside. We need to, but also how are we going to grow talent from inside? Yes. And people can very easily fall into, no, we'll just hire someone, they'll come in, hire a whole new leadership team.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the right thing to do, but not always.
No. And it's usually pretty tough on your cost base too. It's not always the right commercial decision either, is it? Yeah. Let alone for development of everyone. And do you have any rituals around that? Like obviously there's great resources on your platform, but do you commit to a certain cadence? Like just really.
So we do them twice a year. But the truth of it is it only works if it's an ongoing conversation. So I can't remember who it was, but somebody shared this story with me, and it was a really good story where she was saying her dad was a successful businessman, and he shared with her that he said, look, everybody has an amount of money that they need to earn or want to earn. And that's dependent on all sorts of things. It's dependent on their lifestyle, who's dependent on them, and, all these things. But there's a number, and there's a number that they need. Once they get that number, then there's something else that they care about, something else that's important to them. He said, your job as a manager or leader is to figure out what that second thing is. Like, you want to be paying fair salaries, you want to be in market, you want to be able to attract, good people, and you want to be able to put enough money on the table that it's meaningful for people. But it's the second thing. And so part of that is actually, the ritual is being curious and asking people, what do you want? Like, where are you trying to go? What is it that you could learn here? And so the guy, Robbie Kwok, sorry. Oh, I thought Paul. Robbie Kwok, who was the chief people officer at Slack, had a great phrase, which was, we want to be an inflection point in people's careers. So you want to sort of ask, like, what's your next job and how can I help you get there?
Yes, beautiful.
So it's less ritual and more questions that unlock useful conversations.
Yes. And to get your leaders to do that, like obviously you're great at doing that. It's asking them how, continuing to ask them those questions and role modeling.
You want to create a community and a culture inside your own organization where that happens. so
Yeah.
that people see that's what it's expected of you as a leader and as a manager.
Yeah, superb. You see how you have a great culture.
Well, I mean, the other side of it though too is, I'm very proud of what we have at Cultureamp. Equally, there's a phrase that I use, which is, I'll make sure I get this right. Yeah, happiness is reality minus expectations. And so it's not necessarily that you just ask lots of these questions and then everybody's super happy. In some ways, it can create more challenge. It's like building a more diverse company. Diverse companies are harder to run. Like you don't just get a more diverse company and then everybody's happy. In fact, you actually get more conflict and more turmoil and more challenges. But you're doing it because it's worthwhile, because it's important, and it's the right thing to do. And ultimately, the muscles you build in navigating that environment make you a better business.
Yes.
So a lot of the challenge, if you will, is helping leaders and managers navigate all of that. Because when you start going down that line, teaching people how to talk to their people about what they really want and careers and all that sort of stuff. At a certain point, people come back and go, this is horrible. I hate this. I hate having to deal with all these things. I just want to tell people what to do.
So much simpler command and control.
Yeah.
Damn, they talk back.
Yeah. It's like the thing of, the problem with a more diverse organization is now you actually have to listen to a whole range of opinions.
Yeah. That's how you've developed your people. Can we just explore how you developed yourself? Like, you listen, I hear from you already. You learn from the people you've hired, from the diverse backgrounds that you're starting to build as you grow. Is there anything else that's going on in your head? Even the questions you ask yourself about whether you're recommitting for next year, as a CEO. Can you share that narrative? Because that feels like that's the heart of how you've continued to scale. There must be some narrative in your head on how you've negotiated that.
Yeah, and certainly in the last 3 years, given everything that's gone on, I've now been a CEO for coming up on, not quite 20 years, but like 17, 18 years. But in the last 3 years, I've never felt more incompetent in the role. So, there are bits where you're just like, how is this possible? So things that have helped me, one is talking to other people in the same, shoes. You and I caught up over the last couple of years. So you reach out to other people that are founders or CEOs or senior executives. And sometimes all you need to hear is that other people are struggling with all the same problems. Like, you're beating yourself up and then you talk to someone, you're like, oh, good, it's not just me. So that's one. I read a lot, anything I can to learn about different ways of thinking, different ways of ideas that you can bring to bear. I think more than anything, and it's interesting you asked the question about recommitting, part of my own psyche is I don't give up very much. That's always kind of been my model. As a kid, I used to play tennis, and I was good enough to play good people and bad enough to lose. And the way I would do that, so I would always make the third or the fourth in a team of four, like one level above what my talent was probably capable of. And that was because I would just try and get the ball back one more time than the other person would. That was my way of playing. So that's always kind of been my mentality, is I'll stick it out. Like, I think so much of success is turning up and, just continuing to pick yourself up and keep going, pick yourself up and keep going. So now, having done it for this period, and I talk to a lot of other founders and CEOs, like, when's the right time to step out? It's a really interesting question. I'm probably not the best person to answer it, though.
You obviously haven't answered yet.
No, like, I guess that's the thing. Like, for me, I still, there's plenty more I want to do. There's plenty more I still want to prove, both to myself and to the world. But it is interesting that you start to ask yourself, well, what am I trying to prove to whom? And how does this actually prove it? These are kind of interesting existential questions that for the first 10, 15 years, in a startup, you just put your head down and you just go. The quote that I used to refer to a lot in the early days of my startup was, those who say something is impossible should not interrupt those that are doing it. George Bernard Shaw. And so it's just that mentality of like, don't ask if it's possible, just do it. Just go.
Beautiful, beautiful. What do you reckon along the way? It's never linear, and it's often rocky, right? In various points of pain. Do you look back and go, there was certain pinch points where if we'd taken the wrong path at that juncture, we wouldn't have kept on this?
100%. Yeah.
What are they, and what did you learn from them? Maybe give us one.
Yeah. So, I mean, just reflecting on the last question and also into this question too, the other big thing in a startup journey is your founders, your co-founders. You know, so interestingly, I didn't know Rod, Doug, or John before we essentially joined forces. I sat next to Doug and John at co-working space for 6 months, and then we kind of went, we should join forces, and we did. So it was bizarre because oftentimes people are friends and then they do something. We didn't know each other, but we created this strong bond, and then we started a company together. And best decision I ever made. And through so much of the experience, being able to think about those problems together is critical. So if I reflect back on the sorts of situations, it was, we bootstrapped the company until $1 million and a bit in ARR, so 2015. And then we took VC money because we had this opportunity to go faster. And so you look at that and go, what would happen if we didn't do that? How might that have changed our trajectory? Because that really did allow us to double down and go after the market and, be the first mover in that space. And so if we hadn't done that, and it was still a bit of a jump because we kind of had an advisory meeting with 2 advisors that we were working with at the time. We sort of said, do we think we should go for it or not? And their advice was, if you have an opportunity, you have clear air, you have product market fit, put your foot down. And literally I said to the guys, okay, here's roughly what we're thinking. They're like, if you can get money on those terms, you should do it. In the taxi on the way back from that advisory meeting, because we had it in Sydney, to the airport, I get a phone call from Ivan Sinkert at Felicis. And I'd been chatting to him because we were turning up in all these board decks, and he basically offered us a term sheet. So 24 hours from going, yes, we want to do it, to getting a term sheet. And then we thought, do we use this to try and go to market? We're like, no, it's fair. It's in the ballpark. We negotiate a little bit, but we're off and running to the paces. And then we raise money every year for the next, however many, 5-6 years. So that was a key pinch point that I still wonder what would have happened if we hadn't gone through it.
Yeah.
Another one that happened just before that, was somebody who wanted to acquire us. And so we went through that whole process as well. And they ended up putting, a not unreasonable number on the table. It was in the, tens of millions of dollars. But I remember what I said to them at the time. They put the number on the table, and I said, this is all very fair and reasonable, because we were only doing about $1 million in revenue at the time. But you don't start a startup for a reasonable outcome. You start a startup for an unreasonable outcome. So if you want to put an unreasonable number on the table, we can keep talking. Otherwise, we're going to go back to building our business. I would say we are now worth more in market cap than the company that tried to buy us. Nice.
Good call.
And they're a public company.
Ramsden, we call it abnormal potential.
Yeah.
I like that, an unreasonable outcome. And any pinch points for you in your personal journey, where you really, in the same way that your company had pinch points or key crossroads, is there any time where you literally had to shed the way you were operating and kind of shed that skin and move to another level? From founders I talk to and work with, it's that moment of going, I'm not going to solve this problem. I need to step back even when there's a crisis and let someone else. That's a real moment for a lot of founders.
I think I go through that, and I think most leaders do. You go through that every 12 to 18 months.
Right.
But I actually think what the interesting ones are, there's an element that you're going to keep getting the lesson until you can overcome it.
Yes.
And so it's not necessarily that you come up to this thing and you make a decision and then you turn left and then you're no longer doing that thing anymore. There are certain weaknesses, overplays, whatever, that keep coming back, and they keep coming back through your life, and they just get bigger and bigger and bigger until you can actually figure out how to overcome them. And so I think about that a lot in terms of, and to overcome them, you're never going to be completely free of them either. It's not like anybody suddenly changes who they are, and you don't want to change who you are. Like in many ways, I think on the startup journey, you want to be able to become more what you can be, and let go of stuff that's holding you back from being that. And a lot of that is surrounding yourself with people that can take you to that next level. So I don't know if you're familiar with like spiral dynamics and Ken Wilber and all of that sort of stuff, but they have this whole concept of the only way up is through. So it's not like I was like this and now I'm like this. It's here's where I am. To get to the next level, I have to go through that to something above that, and that will change what I am. Yeah. You're going to push me to try and give you a specific example of this now, aren't you?
I'd love you to, if you're open to sharing it.
I think one of the big journeys for me has been, as the CEO, my relationship to my executive team. So, you still need to, at times, make a captain's call or be a tiebreaker, if you will. But I had this realization that I had to step into that team. Like when the exec team's operating at the highest level, we're one team altogether rather than them being my team that I have do things, and that we want to be able to do stuff collectively. And so I think most exec teams go through this thing of having to realize that your exec team needs to be your first team. And normally for most people, what happens is you've got functional leaders or whatever, and each of them is like the head of engineering, the head of marketing. That's their team, is marketing or engineering. And then they kind of turn up to lobby at the exec. And all good exec teams will talk about, at a certain point, you have to agree that the exec team is your first team. And, you need to let somebody else run that other part. And you need to be part of this first and foremost. As a CEO, you need to do that too. And you need to basically figure out how to get down and be in that team rather than sitting on top of it. And so that's been an interesting journey for me.
How do you do that? Is there a way? Is it an offside? Is it a...
It's all of those things. But like going back, you said earlier, you gave the example of having to sit on your hands a little bit. It's, you get into the pattern of seeing things go in a certain way, and then you step in and you solve the problem. And you realize, actually, that's not helping anybody. And so at certain points, you're like, all right, we need to solve this.
Yes.
Here's the problem. I framed the problem. Like, come on, we've got to solve this. And then you just got to, you literally sit on your hands and kind of go, I feel like I could answer this. And it sounds paternalistic when you say it that way. It's not necessarily that you're even got a better idea. And part of it is just giving people space, because we all have learned behaviors in these. And so you have to show people there's a different way of interacting.
Yes, absolutely. And there's you have created this company, you and your founders. So there is a magic that you can bring to every conversation. And you can, in the art of delegating, go too far.
Totally. And I think one of the things I learned from my exec coach, so I have a great exec coach, John Baird, and he works with me a lot on what he calls metacommunication. So like spending more time communicating the idea rather than the answer. And so a lot of it is like, I want to see more of this and less of this. So you like communicating priority stuff. But talking about like accountability, you tend to you go from this like make the call to no, you need to delegate everything. And of course, the truth is not, you need to do both, and you need to know when to do each. And so his Metacomms framework is like, if you're inverted commas delegating to me, you might go, Didier, I need you to look into this for me. It's really, really important. I want to be all over this. Can we make sure that we chat about it every day? Because I want to be intimately involved, and it's really important, but I need you to drive it. And so that's like at one end of the spectrum. The other one is, Didier, I need you to look into this, just keep me across what's going on. Let's make sure it's on our agenda every week in our one-on-one. If you reach any major decisions, bounce them off me before you make them. So that's more autonomy, but I still want to be involved. All the way to the other end where it's like, Didier, I need you to look at this. Unless something crazy comes up, I don't need to hear anything about it. I trust you, just deal with it. And, unless there's a problem, I don't need to hear any more. And what I realized and what he helped me understand was, I probably wasn't doing a good job of doing that meta-communication. And sometimes I might think it's C, but I might be presenting it as A, and the person on the other side gets really confused. And so it was really useful for me just being more explicit in like, well, what do I mean here? So, do I just want you to run with this and let me know or not? And so Mike and Scott from Atlassian talk about this in terms of their root branch tree decision-making framework. But it's just about being explicit and recognizing it's situational.
Yes, and very intentional, which role you're going to play and communicating it. I think that's brilliant. You mentioned the root and trunk example the other day when we were speaking. I've thought about it so much since. It's just a beautifully simple analogy to be purposeful about which you're going
and it allows, if we're working together, it allows us to move our comms to a meta level, where if we disagree, if I'm like, Helen, why did you make that decision? Or why didn't you come to me on that? We can have a conversation about why you thought it was a branch decision, like a leaf decision, and why I thought it was a branch decision, because that's interesting. We have different contexts.
Yes. Well, and it depersonalizes the issue, doesn't it? It's fabulous. Anything when you look back, like obviously so much learned, that you would do differently?
A million things. If you were able to go back and do what you did, knowing what you know now, like, the key area is probably hiring, because you look at it and you place a bunch of bets, and sometimes you get those bets wrong, and sometimes you get those bets spectacularly right. I think it would probably boil down into those things, which is like, how do you improve your odds on hiring, get better? Like, no one's 100%, but like everything you can do is the better. And then secondly, reminding yourself to have more courage in your conviction. Like, once again, it's easy with hindsight, but you sort of look back and go, we shouldn't have hedged. We should have swung even harder. Like, we had the right idea, and then like a year or 2 years later, we're like, we still haven't actually done the thing we started doing. If we just ignored all the other things that were getting in the way and just really doubled down on that, we would have been in a better place. So that, that's the sort of stuff that I look back on and think, have the courage in your conviction. When you go for something, go for it fully. Don't hedge your bets.
Yeah, and that's almost a focus thing. Like,
it's a focus thing, and it's not necessarily just what you're doing, but the force with which you're doing it that matters.
That's just been awesome. Thank you, Didier. So I might just go to my closing question. What is your one piece of advice for a scale-up CEO?
Give me two pieces of advice for a scale-up CEO.
Sure.
One is, if you don't have a coach, I think you should get yourself a coach, because it's a very powerful mechanism for holding yourself accountable to being, like, you don't want to overplay the ego of the CEO founder, but it's important to kind of realize that you're probably the limiting factor on most of the people around you. So, a coach is a way of going, if I can't grow myself, how can I expect the people around me to deliver at the level I want to? So one is get a coach. And then two, a lot of the value that I've got has been talking to other CEOs, senior executives, board members, whatever, and getting them to share with me explicit things like, if let's say you meet another CEO and you're chatting about stuff and you're comparing notes, and you say to them, would you be willing to show me your diary for a week? Like, feel free to block out anything I shouldn't see. So much of the value comes from seeing it specifically. I've got so much value from just seeing how somebody else lays out their week, because I'm like, oh, why do you do? Oh, that's a good idea. I could use that. Or, how do you run your board meeting? Can you walk me through the agenda for your board meeting? Or how do you run your weekly executive meeting? These things are kind of boring, banal things, but they're also create huge amounts of value over time. And there's so much value from seeing specifically how somebody else does it. So don't be afraid. Like, they're things that most people are happy to share with you.
Yeah, amazing. That's very specific. Learning from others. Yeah. How do you run your board meeting? I have to ask.
I run my board meeting in the sense that it's very collegiate, in the sense that everybody around the table gets a voice. So if you're at my board meeting, then I already, pre the board meeting, I'll reach out to every board member. So somebody once said to me, you never want to raise a topic without knowing what everybody feels about it.
Yes.
And then depending on who has the relevant experience, I'll go to them to hear their viewpoints. But then I always want to make sure that everyone in the room has a chance to speak if needed. Give everyone that opportunity to share their view and their voice. And you really want to use the time in the board meeting as much as you can to brainstorm together, not just to present. You don't just want to turn up and go, here's how everything's going. Are we okay? You want to be able to go to them and go, here's a topic that we're wrestling with. Here's 3 different ways we're thinking about it. What are your experiences? How might you help us with this? Yeah. But the specificity is important because it's really valuable just to see little things like, do you have a closed agenda or not? Is it at the start or is it at the end? How much time do you spend going through finance and audit committee or something? Do you have 2 discussion topics or 3? All of those things are valuable.
How long is it even?
Yeah, exactly. We have 3 hours 4 times a year. 2 of them are in person. So even those types of things are super helpful.
Super helpful. Fascinating. Awesome. Thank you so much.